¿Se ve la diapositiva?
Yes, no problem at all.
Como el otro día había problemas.
No.
Okay, so let's go into the third webinar, the last one. So in the previous webinars, we have seen the development or the different stages we went through from the very, very, very beginning in a phonics program up to when we finished the 44 main sounds with some alternative spellings and some tricky words. And today we're going to go into the last part. We're going to go deeper into working tricky words, into working with magic air, and then how to step onto reading and writing, proper reading and writing, independent reading and writing, right? So here you have just to remember a little reminder of the teaching routine of the different letter sounds, all right? Remember that we always began with the orange color. First, we introduce the sound. Then we did some practice, especially the younger they are, the more total physical response we have to do with them. If you already have been working with them for 2 years, that is in infants 3 and infants 4, maybe in infants 5 here, you can introduce some other kind of activity to practice the sounds. But I think that total physical response is very funny for them and they never get fed up of it. So you can just keep on and on. Then we do some application of the new sounds that we have introduced through simple games. Consolidate the sounds, all right? And then we did some further practice, revisit and review all the previous sounds. And then the following session, we would introduce the new letter sound again. So remember that's something that was very, very important. All synthetic phonic methods, or not methods, all the different synthetic phonics programs are cumulative. That means that every new session we introduce a new sound and we have to revisit and review the previous one, all right? So that makes that after 44 sessions, if you go a sound per session, you would be revisiting all the 43 previous sounds. Or if you do 2 sounds and a stop to consolidate, 2 sounds, a stop to consolidate, 2 sounds, stop, consolidate, after several, I think it's about, if you do it on a daily basis, would be after 4 months, more or less, you have seen all the 44 sounds. However, the important thing is that this is not a competition, so it is not necessary to finish it in just 3 months or just in 44 days, all right? So you have a whole year to practice phonics. So if you can do only, because you only have 1 session per week, if you can only do, I don't know, 26 sounds, much the better. It is better than doing nothing, all right? Because the important thing when they are 3 is especially training the ear to reproduce the sounds of the English phonological system, all right? But it is important to follow the teaching routine and remember always present the keyword and the sound contained in the keyword. And the last thing to be done is to present the grapheme or the digraph that represents that sound. Okay, because remember that for young learners, of these very young learners, those little ants mean nothing, all right? So the last thing, once they practice the sound and they identify the sound, is to present the grapheme or the digraph and then map the corresponding sound onto it. Right, so these are the phases we have seen up to the moment. We have seen the sound letter identification, which is the very first phase or step in phonics, right? That is, children hear different sounds in words and they have to be able to identify them. First, by total physical response, then physically, by answering physically to a demand you do from them about a specific letter sound. And once you introduce the digraph or the grapheme, they have to identify it by hearing the sound and being able to transcribe it, all right? Then we saw also blending and segmenting. I remind for you or to people who hasn't been here before, blending has to do with reading, that is blending sounds together in order to sound out longer units like words and later on sentences. And segmenting is just the opposite action, that is listening to words and then being able to segment the different sounds that composes words and being able to transcribe them. So segmenting is the action needed for writing. Then another thing we have to bear in mind was the tricky words. Today we're going to focus on tricky words more than in the previous webinars, because in the previous webinars I just told you that they were necessary to be worked, but today we're going to see the way I approach tricky words in class, especially with very young learners, because it's tricky to do it. Then alternative spellings, we saw, or we talked about them a little bit. Today we're going to see them also a little bit deeper. All the alternative spellings are different spellings that are different from the main one that appears in the phonics program. For example, in the majority of phonics programs, the tense sound E is represented by double E, all right? So all different spellings representing the same sound, like for example, EA, that also sounds E, are called alternative spellings. Okay, that is what alternative spelling means. Then sound features. The other day, I think on the last webinar, we saw some sound features like the tense and the lax characteristic of some vowels, which usually we call them long and short. So today we're going to see some other sound features to be worked in class, especially with the 5-year-olds. Then go into reading, and the last step would be writing. Remember that phonics has to do with orality. So the majority of the work has to be oral, all right? And remember that I said on my first webinar that if you don't want to work or do any writing thing or any writing stuff with the 3-year-olds, is fine, because the important thing is the orality. But once we get into infants 5, when they have been, after they have been working for 2 years, all the sounds and tricky words and alternative spellings, etc., they should be mastering the blending and the segmenting, so it is going to be easier for them to start doing some proper writing. All right? Okay, so those are the different phases we have seen. Some of them we have seen them a little bit before, and today we're going to concentrate on the tricky words and some sound features and alternative spellings, which usually are the 3 most complicated things to deal with in phonics with the young learners. Right, tricky words. What are tricky words? Some phonics programs call them tricky words, some others magic words, some others red words, depending on the program and depending on the author. They use one or another term to refer to these kind of words. I like the one tricky words because I play a magic trick with children to introduce them, all right? So these are words that don't follow any phonetic pattern that we have seen in class with the children, all right? So when they see any of the tricky words, they try to apply the phonological knowledge they have already in English, that is, the knowledge of the 44 sounds that we have been working in class, but it doesn't work because there is some trick in there, something tricky that makes the word sound different. All right. So usually in the past in Britain, work them as exceptions, and what they have to do was learn them by heart. All right. And well, that is what they mostly do in Britain and in America, learn them by heart or by using word walls, etc. The problem was that, okay, a native speaker can understand tricky words when they read them because they understand the meaning of the words. And some of the tricky words are easier for them to be read in context because, again, they are native and they can understand the meaning of those words. What is the problem with non-native speakers? That for them, those words are completely new. They are meaningless in principle because they don't understand the meaning of these words. And how can you explain to a 3, 4, or 5-year-old that a word that they can see written in one way, it is pronounced in a different way? It's very, very difficult for them to understand that if they have been taught that sounds and sounds when they found and together in meadow, it sounds meh, but when the and are together independently, that is in isolation, it sounds completely different, sounds me. Okay, so this is very difficult for them to understand. So after trying many different ways, many different explanations, because there's not a lot you can explain to very young learners about how tricky words work because they don't understand them. They don't understand what you explain because they don't have linguistic knowledge, all right, or phonological knowledge as regards the theory. So I decided to concentrate on the tricky word that is in tricky words, to concentrate and focus on tricky and play a magic trick. So this is what I use in class with my students. All right, I use a magic hat and a magic wand. You can see that my magic wand is completely bent down. I had to get another one for next year, because after 7 years that my poor magic wand is completely worn out. So some of you will recognize the flowers you have in there. If you have ever used Jolly Phonics, those are the flowers that come with the Jolly Phonics program. All right, that is for each group of tricky words in the same way. The letter sounds are introduced or are grouped out in different groups. There are 7 groups in Jolly Phonics. The same happens to the tricky words. All right, there are 7 different groups of tricky words, and there are about 10 words in each per group. So at first, as I explained you on my first webinar, I use the tricky words in the same way as it comes in the teacher's handbook. That is, presenting the tricky word, put it in on the word wall, creating a full word wall of tricky words, and then revisiting the new ones, etc., etc. But I've realized that my children sometimes didn't remember them. All right, because in the moment they saw the I in isolation, they tend to say E, and the B, they tend to say B, although we worked them in class, since there was nothing behind that they could understand. At first they said B, and when I said B, but these are tricky, remember. So quickly they changed the mind, it's B. So I saw that there was something that it wasn't working really there. So I created my magic trick. And the magic trick is so stupid. And the good thing about this is that my children really call me a magician, right? There's still a boy now in year 4 whoever teacher goes in class to teach them, literally tells them that Angela is a magician, right? So he still believes in that. So what I do is I created those little speech bubbles you have in there. Those speech bubbles, they are laminated and they are in salmon color, so which is more or less the tone of my skin, right? And they are small enough to fit the palm of my hand. So I put them in the palm of my hand like that, right? So when I make gestures or whatever, I make sure that I never show them the palm of the hand. However, since the word is turned over, so they cannot see it, then the tone of the paper is so similar to my skin that they cannot identify that. All right, so they don't see anything in my hand. So when I have to present a tricky word, I ask them, what can you see here? What color is this? Because again, the colors are different depending on the different groups. What shape is this? This is a flower, for example. And what can you see here? And they'd say, well, here I see E, for example, right? E. And I tell them, yes, listen, but this word is a little bit magic. We can play a magic trick to make this word sound differently. So you can imagine the faces. So what I do is I give the flower to one of the kids, tell them to put the flower into the hat, into the magic hat, which is a hat bought at the Chino shop, so €1 hat, and the magic one exactly the same. And I ask them to do the magic words, abracadabra and abracadabra. We do all this confirmation, we check that the word is in there, etc. So in the moment when I give them the magic wand, and I try to distract them, and I put my hand into the hat again, and then I place the speech bubble right under the flower, right? So when we do the checking that the flower is in there, I just press with my hand at the bottom of the magic hat, and they can see the flower, but not what is just under it, because, or below, be under it, sorry, because it's small enough again to be covered by the full flower. So when they say the magic words and all the class says the magic words, I take out the speech bubble and I tell them, I ask them, look, is this a flower? They say, no. What color is this? Is this color blue or whatever the color corresponds? They say, no. And I said, I look at this and I point to the little triangle on the speech bubble and I said, this means that something talks. So have you ever seen a comic or a book in which the characters talk and they have that? Some children did, some children didn't. So I tell them, well, but this means that this talks. So this talks, I, right? So when we finish, or the class, that day, I put the blue flower on the word wall, right? And then I put the scaffolding, that speech bubble is going to be the scaffolding to remember children, to remind children that that word that they are seeing there sounds differently. So the flower, and then here I put the speech bubble, right? So in the following session, we do the magic again. We will introduce do, for example. I introduce it, I will show the flower. They say the blending, they know, duh, all right? And I tell them, remember, here is the hat. What is going to happen here? They say magic. So we do all the magic trick again, and the do comes out. So when they go, and we make a revision of I. So when they go home, I will go to the tricky word wall, and I place the flower of do, and then the speech bubble of do, all right? So whenever we do the revision, or we revisit the previous tricky words, what I do is I point to the word in the flower, and then immediately afterwards I point to the speech bubble. So if I have the I with the speech bubble, I would do I, do, me, be. So I point to how that word, that tricky word, talks. All right. And after we finish the whole group of 10 words, I take away the scaffolding. I take away all the speech bubbles, all right? And by that moment, up to that moment, children have that scaffolding to help them remember that there's something that sounded different in there. But when you take it away, in the following session that I start introducing the new group, I think that after the blue one comes the yellow one. So when I start introducing the first yellow sound, and we do the revision of the previous sounds, that is all the blue group, my children go straight away, I, do, to, be, me, she, etc., without needing the scaffolding, because they have internalized that so much in the previous sessions that they don't need scaffolding anymore, and because they know that those words with the special shape of the flower talk different. Okay, so up to this moment, this is the only way I could find to teach my children successfully the tricky words, all right? And they understand why there is a change in there. And the reason is magic. So this is why this magic transformation takes place, because it's through some magic trick. So if anybody has ever found, or if anybody uses any other way or approach to introduce tricky words in class, please just let me know. This is the only one I've used in class that was really, really effective. And I know that some teachers, after some training in the training courses that I did with them, tried them in class and they said that it really worked. Okay. At the beginning, you can finally be clumsy with the speech bubbles or whatever, but it goes very quickly because, again, the children are very easy to distract, and then because they are open to believe in magic and everything. All right. So, by the way, up to the moment and up to this very, very moment, this trick is working for me, and my little ones are learning the tricky words with no effort in this sense. Then, once we introduce the tricky words, in the same way we do with the independent sounds, we have to practice them. All right. So it is necessary that they start like within the independent sounds. We started working with CVC words and then CCVC words. That is increasing the amount of letters and letter sounds in words. We have to start using the tricky words, because they need to understand that the tricky words can appear in different contexts, and that in any moment one tricky word can appear. All right. So for that, I use all kind of resources and materials you can imagine. So here, for example, we have some flashcards in which they have highlighted and in big size the tricky word, and then they have a simple sentence in which that tricky word appears. So they see the tricky word being used in context. All right. And all the sentences that are on those cards, are decodable. That is, every single letter sound, every tricky word that is in there, or every word that appears in there with an alternative spelling, has already been worked in class previously. So to make it easier for them to understand what they are reading. Okay, so here they are starting to read full sentences, simple, very simple ones, that are decodable and that contain tricky words, right? And here they are practicing writing. So remember that the other day I made a difference between writing and handwriting. First, we start writing with different elements, with letter tiles. There you have the letter tiles. Remember that I told you about the ones in the Scrabble? Well, these are similar to the ones in the Scrabble, but without the numbers. So these letter tiles are from this it's a game you have there called Bananagrams. All right, they come in a banana. It's just like the Scrabble, but without any points. All right. So what they are doing there is I gave them some cards with tricky words written on them, and they have to find the corresponding one and build them up using or form the word using the letter tiles. In fact, if you have a look closely, I don't know if you can see it very well, all the tricky words that appear on the cards are in lowercase letters, right? And the tiles are in uppercase letters, all right? All the tiles are capital letters. So again, this controversial thing we talked about the other day, what about using lowercase or uppercase? It depends on the teachers, but I want to expose my students to different kinds of letter or fonts and lettering, and the more they get used to, much the better for them, because that would mean that they would be able to, as I said the other day, use the keyboard of computer, read different things are in the world around them, etc. And once they have practiced a little bit writing with the letter tiles, what they do is handwriting on a worksheet as you have in there. As I said before, in infants, I use a lot wipe-off resources, either wipe-off lab whiteboards, or what I do sometimes is laminate the worksheets. So I don't really want my students to fill worksheets with loads of different tricky words, but just for training or just for training with handwriting, what I do is laminate some of the worksheets, and then we wipe them off and we exchange them, so we have them for several times. All right. If I want to create a specific worksheet for them to take home, that is going to be different. But I use a lot of these and some of these transparent pockets in which you can on which you can write, and then they are wipe off again, because this is just for practicing handwriting and fine motor skills. And then here you have, you know that sight words are those words, again, that children have to learn by sight because they don't follow the phonological patterns. So some others call them sight words instead of tricky words. It creates different kinds of resources and material for them to practice them. So, for example, here they're playing with crayons. They have all the tricky words in there, so they have to find the different letters that form the tricky word. The same, sorry, with the Legos. And then in the case of the ice creams, this, for example, the two first games would be for lower level students, and the other one for students who are a little bit above the others, because here what they have is the tricky word, but in disorder. So, for example, they have to and they need to know that that makes at. So they have to find the ice cream ball, all right, and put it on the corresponding cone. So this is a little bit, this is something I do, for example, at the end of Infants 5 or in year 1, or with top students in Infants 5. Here you are the other ideas of activities. The monsters are on top of transparent cups. So depending on the die they have in there, I bought some wooden die which are completely blank, and I wrote with permanent pens there the tricky words I wanted to practice. So what they have to do is roll the die, and then wherever the die falls, they have to read the tricky word and put a marker or feed the monster with some of the markers they have in there. Then here we have the lacing letters. These letters have got holes, so what they have to do is just pick up a tricky word, like the ones they have in their trucks, and then create the word taking the letters. Why is this so important? Because this makes children not only see the letters, but they have to look for the corresponding letters one by one, and this helps them a lot with phonological awareness, that is, to understand that many times in English there are more letters than sounds. So in the case of some, for example, they will understand that by selecting the letters they have to, it becomes more memorable doing it with these lacing letters, because they will remember that to build up some, they needed 4 letters. So when later on writing comes, they will understand and not understand, but they will remember that in some there is an E, a magic E they have to put at the end of the word, right? And then the same thing with umbrellas. In each umbrella there is a tricky word. So I punched out as many holes as letters are there, and what they have to do is hang on those hooks the different raindrops that made the full tricky word. Okay, right. So before we continue, I am really interested on that. Any of you have ever created any way, method, or do you have any idea on how to introduce tricky words that is not the classical of side words and then looking, remembering, or covering and then writing? Any special tricks to introduce the tricky words? Yes, no, you did it just or you do it as the programs establish? Because I told you that I tried many different ways, and the magic trick is the only one I found absolutely successful. All right. Okay, so let's move on. Right. Let's move into alternative spellings. As I said before, the alternative spellings are those spellings that are different from the ones that are presented as the main spelling into the 44 main sounds, all right? For example, in the majority of programs, OW is presented with OU, and OW would be as an alternative spelling. I, in the majority of programs, is presented with IE, and EW would be an alternative spelling. One alternative spelling is easy, right? The problem comes, or things start to complicate more, when out from one main sound like A, that is AI, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different alternative spellings, all right? So all the spellings you have at the bottom represent the sound A. So with OW and I, for example, there is not much problem, really, because it is just one in this case. But there are sounds that have many different possible spellings, and children have to face that because in the moment they start reading books which are not decodable, that is when they start the proper independent reading, they will find those alternative spellings, and they should be able to read them out. Okay. So here there is an activity that we saw the other day with the French fry boxes from McDonald's, right? And in which they had to classify the fries, the chips that I prepared with yellow paper. And then a more classical one, that was the first I started with, that is presenting in columns the different alternative spellings of the main spelling. And what they had to do was read in small cards the different spellings and classify them. So I started with this pink one, but I found out to make it in a more dynamic and in a funnier way to do it with the chips. All right. So now we almost forgot the pink one. As regards the sound features, I'm not going to insist on alternative spellings because we had talked about them on the previous webinar. And at the end of the day, what they have to do is practice different spellings they can have for the sound. So after doing these kind of games, what you can do is present them different spellings of words in which you tell them, listen, all these words sound A. So they practice by reading them and seeing or focusing on the different alternative spelling. Usually when when I do these kind of activities with children, what I do is highlight the spelling, the alternative spelling that represents the sound I want them to practice, and the other letters are all in color black. So this again makes the sight focus on the different letters that appear in there and that represent the same sound. As regards the sound features, is something also that we have to work, and that is very important in the synthetic phonics programs, because not only the letter sounds, the tricky words and alternative spellings are important, but as we said the other day, these synthetic phonics programs work a lot on phonological awareness. And phonological awareness has to do with the different quality of sounds, the characteristics of the sounds, and the different positions of sounds in words. And this is something children need to know in order for later on reading and writing. Okay, and one of the things we saw, one of the reasons why is that sometimes in English there are more letters than sounds, and our students need to know that, right? So some of the sound features you can work with students are, for example, tense and lag tension, which exist especially in vowels, like in I and E, or like in and O, for example, right? Which you or which we were traditionally taught as long, short vowels. It is true that the length of the vowel is a little bit longer in the case of the long ones, but the proper term to be used in phonetics is tense and lags. And remember that it has to do with the tension of the muscles of the lips and the cheeks, all right? So the E should be very tense and the I should be very lax. And remember that trick that we saw the other day about putting the palms of the hand or the fingers on the cheeks and practicing with students tense and lax sounds for them to understand and to feel how the muscles get in tension when you do a tense sound like E, and how they relax when you do tense lax sounds as O or E or E, for example, or the different tension when they do E or they do E. Okay. Right, then you can practice also voiced and devoiced sounds, all right? Like, for example, S and Z, or T and D. How can you practice with this with children? Because obviously you cannot teach 3, 4, 5-year-olds that the T is a devoiced sound and the D is a voiced sound, because they won't understand a word. So the easiest way is to tell them, look, we're going to put this part of the hand here on the throat, and now we're going to say the sound. You can try if you want, because you're going to see that it's very physical, and they will experiment it. So if we say S, do you feel anything there? S, I don't feel anything. But if I say Z, Z, do you feel anything in there? It tickles. That is what they say. Hace cosquillas. It tickles. Yes, it tickles, right? Or if you say t, 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 nothing happens. But if you say d, 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 it tickles again. So this is a way of teaching very young learners, of making them experience the difference between voiced and devoiced sounds. And for example, in T and D, this could be more evident, but one of the sounds our students, especially non-native students of English, not non-native, Spanish particularly, Spanish students of English have, one of the problems they have a lot is with the correct pronunciation of Z, because they tend to do it devoiced, as in Spanish. They say pizza, no pizza, for example. For an Italian speaker, it's easier, but for a Spanish speaker, it's more difficult. Or, for example, when the B buzzes, instead of buzzes, they say buses. Or I'm going to the zoo instead of going to the zoo. So this exercise of touching the vocal cords, or touching the throat, to feel really the vocal cords when they are vibrating, makes a difference in order to the children start realizing that the sound S and the sound Z are different, and something that there's something they have to bear in mind when producing them. All right. Then the same happens with plosives. All right. Most of the children tend to say potato, cat. Potato, cat. I don't know. Goat, and it's goat, potato, cat. All those sounds are plosive, and implosion is something you have to practice, especially because, as I told you before, the children have with their own phonological knowledge, which is the Spanish one in this case, and they try to apply it in order to try to read what is in there. So since there is no plosive in Spanish, we have to, or there are no plosives in Spanish, we have to teach them how to do plosives in Spanish. So from, you have many different ways, like just putting their hand in front of them and then say pa, pa, or pa, pa. So when it is plosive, they feel the air in the palm of the hand, or taking a paper like this, for example, and say, don't tense the paper very much, and say pa, pa, p, or p, p, p. So when it is plosive, the paper moves. Some of the teachers I used this trick at the beginning many years ago with a candle, okay, with the flame of the candle, but I decided that it was a little bit dangerous, so I skipped it. And what I use now a lot is a mirror. All right. So with a mirror, when they produce a plosive sound, then the mirror gets the air gets in the mirror, you know, and they see physically that there is some condensed air in there. All right. And again, plosion have three different plosives have three different positions depending on the point of articulation. So, for example, for p, you have to put the hand in front of the mouth, but for the glottals, like for example, g or k, right, the velar ones, you have to do it here, g, k, because if you try to do k here, they feel the air just right down here in the arm. Because since it is velar, right, the air tends to go down. So p, t, g, for example, or k, p, t, k. For example, for the ones that are alveolar, is t and d, the air tends to go down, not to the front. All right, so there are different positions of the hand to introduce the plosives depending on the point of articulation. Then you have the affricatives, the affricates, the alveolars, that is all the characteristics or the different characteristics of the consonants that have to do with the position of the tongue, of the different parts of the tongue, if it is the rim, if it is the rims of the tongue, if it is the tip of the tongue, if it is the blade. So this is why it is very important in phonics to exaggerate a lot every time you introduce the sounds, because children need to see your face and see your mouth and where the tongue goes, if it goes up, if it goes, if it is flat, if it is a little bit curved, how you round the lips, how the tension is produced, etc., etc. Right? And the glottal stop. The glottal stop, you know that especially in the north of England and in Scotland, they use them. In Scotland, they use a lot. All right. So depending on your accent, or if you want to introduce some funny thing here, for example, for the little ones, the glottal stop is funny because it's difficult for them. It's just to practice things like bottle, in which you do this stop in the glottis, all right, as they do in the north of England, and we do it just to play a little bit and again to do some gymnastics with the glottis, right? So these are some of the sound features that we should work in phonics with children, because they need to understand again that to produce the sound I, they need no tension at all in the muscles, but to produce the sound E, tension is needed. So otherwise, if they don't see the difference between these two sounds, they would never be able to produce or to sound them out correctly, right? So here, how can you work with sound features? For example, through rhymes. We saw this the other day, right? Word families in which we have the onset and the rhyme. This rhyme is written this way. That is not misspelling in there. This rhyme has nothing to do with nursery rhymes, with the rhyme in a poem, right? This rhyme means that is the part of the word that is invariable and that is fixed and never changes. And the onset is the beginning of the word, that is the one that changes. So, for example, in the case of onset, the rhyming words is a pattern in which children learn little by little more and more words that have some common characteristics, in which they can be, for example, in at, they have a plosive at the end, and they have a very, very open vowel in there. All right, so they see openness and plosion, for example, of plosive in the case of a t. So little by little, by working with these kind of activities, children practice them a lot and they become aware of the characteristics of the sounds in the word. Another thing we do with the sound features is syllabication, because syllabication in English is completely different from Spanish, all right? Especially because in the case of English, there are many, many words with consonant blends or consonant clusters, or some words in which 2 letters, that is a digraph, or 3 letters, a tetragrammaton, are part of the same sound unit, which in Spanish normally doesn't happen, all right? So we do syllabication with clapping, as you syllabication, for example, or features. So what they have to do is remember that they have to split the word in different syllables, that is in different beats, okay, and that in each beat there should be a vocalic element that is necessary. And later on, we practice them with the games like the one you have in there, in which they have acorns, and they have to put the corresponding acorn on the different squirrels depending on the number of syllables they've got. Then another characteristic is soft and hard, because in English we have soft k and hard k, and soft g and hard g, for example. All right, because the sound that you're introduced is always the hard one. That is, they in the 44 main sounds we introduce k and g, but not j and z when they are with in combination with other letters, right? So this is something we have to work when the letter C sounds k, and when the letter C sounds s, or when the letter G sounds g, and when the letter G sounds j. All right. So here what they are doing is practicing by classifying short C and hard C. Then we come to magic A. You can probably hear that many people call them or calls it magic E, but again, I'm trying to be consistent with what we do in phonics. In phonics, if we talk about sounds, this is going to be magic A, no magic E. All right, because magic E is the name of letter, and remember that when we do phonics, we never talk about the alphabet. So in the case of magic E, we can find two scenarios. One is words like in some or come, in which there is an E at the end of the word that is mute, that is silence. That is easy, okay? Because usually these are words which later on are like CVC words. That is not CVC because they have the magic E at the end, but there is no not alteration in the previous sounds. Some is s, and then the magic E. Come, k, and then the magic E. So there is no the magic E produces no alteration on the previous sounds. All right, but there are cases in which the magic E makes magic in the previous sounds, in the previous vocalic sounds, and it changes. And this is the difficult one. Okay, when the magic E alters the previous vowel. Like, for example, the example you have there, which is kite. So the magic A is silent, but it makes magic on the I, and instead of I, it sounds I. Again, this happens a little bit like with the tricky words. They are used to, or if they follow the way they've been taught or they've been worked in class, they would read these kite, right? Because it's k, it, kite. But they have to learn that when there is a magic E at the end, this magic E is called that way because it makes magic, and there is a change on the previous vowel. And we do it again using magic. So we use that magic E once, and if you have a look at the E on the card, on the E we have also a magic star, and that means that when that appears, they move the magic E onto the letter I, they touch it like with a magic wand, all right, and immediately afterwards they say ripe instead of repair, okay? And I present them cards like the ones you have in there, in which they have plan, cup, bit, and then when we put the magic E, there is a change in there, and bit becomes bite, cup becomes cube, and plan becomes plain. We also do a physical activity in which I put my students in front of the class, and then I am going to be magic E, and I tell to the boy who is, or the girl, to the child, I mean, who is going to represent, because we held cards. So imagine that I want to do, for example, bite. Right, so one child would be holding B, another one E, another one T, and I would be the magic E. And the magic E in my card, instead of being color black, is golden color, right? Or is faded. The color is faded away with a dotted line, and to make it different from the others. And then that just to make it visual for children that letter has something special, and the special thing she has is that it's mute, is silence, and it's going to make some magic. So what I do is, when we are going to say or to sound out the word, I hold the hand of the child who's got the vowel, and I say, when I'm just pull you from the hand, you have to say I or A or O or ow. Those are the names of the letters, and sometimes you can use them as expressions of, hey, what are you, like, hey, what are you doing? No, I. right? So I cannot do it here. It is better if you could see it physically done. But again, this is very memorable for them because they understand that something happens with me. The magic is just pulling their hands away, because that means that they have to sound different from what they did at the beginning. And then we use also these kind of cards in which they are folded, all right? So they have cap and they have the corresponding picture. And when we include the magic then it transforms into cape, and then the word changes, because this is very important. What they have to understand with the magic is that if it is present or not, that means that one word can change the meaning. That is the most important thing. All right, so they are practicing that in there. And then later on, I give them this card. Some of them have to do with the pegs, is read what they've got in there. And after we have worked the magic previously, they have to pin the corresponding magic on the correct word to make it sound correctly. So cane, can, cup, cube, for example. All right, so just different ways to practice the magic. Something similar we do for with contractions. In the case of contractions, is something that we have to teach them from very young stages or very young ages, because they are used on a daily basis, especially on oral speech, in speech, right? So I introduce contractions for the first time with these kind of cards, in which we have the full form, and then a part that I can bend on top of the full form, and they see the contraction. So again, like they physically see how there is something that disappears, all right? Like in ETs, when I fold the apostrophe S on top of is, they notice that the E disappears, and this is the way I use to introduce the contractions. And the contractions is they are quite easy to practice. All right. For example, with different games, here we have a game of the chocolate boxes contractions, in which they have cards with a contraction and the full form. So they have to read the full form, find the corresponding contraction, or the other way around, because they need to be able to determine from a contraction what is the full the corresponding full form, or the other way around. They have the full form and how they could contract it, right? And they are doing the same there. Sorry, on the left with the B-bot. I don't know if you're familiar with that. That the B-bot is a robot which they can they program themselves. It is a very easy robot to be programmed, because it only contains 4 orders. It has some keys on top of the body. So one means forward, another one is backwards, another is turn right, another one is turn left, and then OK. And then there is a blue one with a cross that means clear out all the previous orders. So what I tell them, for example, is, OK, I want you to put the B-bot in I'm. Now you have to take the B-bot to the corresponding non-contraction, to the full form that corresponds to I'm. So it's a funnier way for them to make revision of contractions using the B-bot, all right, in a more technological way. Right. So as I said the other day, and as we have seen up to the moment, remember that we should start always reading with CVC words, which is the easiest way to start in English, because all CVC words are transparent. That means that all the letters in CVC words are easily recognizable by students if they have been presented them in the 44 sounds, right? And then we start progressing later on into more difficult ones, that is longer words and with more consonants, more vowels. At the beginning, always with more consonants than vowels, because the problem in English comes with the vowels, not with the consonants, right? And little by little, as they progress, making words more difficult. It doesn't mean that they have to be longer. Remember that we saw this on the very first webinar. In the case of phonics, length is not that important, right? So afterwards, we move into language chunks, into pictogram, cards, etc. And finally, into the decodable books that I'm not going to repeat again, because I told you several times about them. And you have to make sure that your children are able to read comprehensively, that is understanding those decodable books, all right? Because what we do with the decodable books is use them first at school, and later on they can take them home to read at home, to practice their reading, etc., etc. So, for example, as we saw the other day, we start reading with CVC words, consonant, vowel, consonant, and there is a lot of different material and resources you can find, either commercial ones or on the internet, in which they present vowels in a different color from consonants to make it more visual for children. Remember that another of the characteristics of the phonics programs is that they are multisensorial or multisensory, right? So the more senses they can put on what they are doing, the better. So by classifying consonants and vowels with different colors at the beginning is very helpful for them. Then after reading a word level, like here, CVC words, CCVC words, CCVCC words, etc. Once they master that, or once they have practiced that a lot, and you see that they are good at doing it, we start reading language chunks. Remember that the language chunk is not a full sentence, because in language chunks there are no actions, there are no verbs, right? So here, for example, this is a game we play a lot in small groups called What's in the Box. So in the box they have they have language chunks, all right, and they have many different pictures. So what they have to do is read what is on the language chunk and then find the corresponding picture. And I made sure that in these language chunks, there are some of them that can be misleading for them. Like, for example, there is one, a cat in the hat, but there is another one, a cat in the bed, a cat on a mat. Why? Because if they only read a cat and you only have a picture of a cat, they would go immediately to pick up the cat. But what I want them to do is read the full language chunk to see that there are many different possibilities. It's something about a cat, but one is on the mat, another is in the bed, another is in a hat, etc., etc. So to make sure that they read the full language chunk, all right? And after the language chunk, we do full sentences with pictograms, as we saw the other day. This is a game for positional words in which they have to put the different toys nearby or next to or under or on, etc., the different elements that they have in there. Then we do read a full sentence level, as you have there on your right. For example, make the fly go away. So what they have is, on one side of the car, they have the keyword that contains the sound I want to work. And then on the other side, they have a full sentence containing that word in context, right? So if they understand the word, usually it is easier for them when they see the word in context to understand the full sentence. So this is full sentence level. So remember, word level, language chunk level, full sentence level, and then here you have another example of full sentence level. These are reading strips. On each strip they have a full sentence. And then finally, the decodable books, right? Word level, language chunk, full sentence, and decodable books in which they have texts. In decodable books, usually the younger they are, the easier the decodable books are, and normally the only text they have is one simple sentence. But as they grow up in difficulty, you find decodable books with short text or paragraphs of 2 or 3 lines. All right, so as they progress in the program. And as regards writing, I insist again that writing doesn't mean just handwriting, all right? But you can start writing using letter types, using paper letters, wooden letters, foam cube letters, etc. And later on, once they have practiced all that, is when you can start introducing handwriting. And I insist on something that I said the other day too, that is very, very important, that before going into writing, a lot of oral practice is needed, because children need to listen and understand and speak out many different words, a lot of vocabulary. So the more they hear, the better they will understand, and the easier will be later on for them to write things. Okay, so lots of oral practice before. And here you have more examples of writing that we saw the other day with the phonic fans, with the wooden letters. Here, for example, on your right, these kids are working. These are in year 1. They are writing full sentences, what we call silly sentences. There is a color code there. Red are the adjectives. Then blue are the nouns. Green are the verbs. And yellow are also the nouns. So they can do little teacher looks out the window, for example, or I don't know, the fast rabbit ate a flower, things like that. So they are writing, or little teacher appeared, window happily. Later on, what we do is introduce the articles in there, but they are starting writing without doing handwriting yet. And handwriting would be the last step. So as you see, for example, in these cases, children first form the words using the manipulatives, all right, and later on they write them down, okay? And for example, here in the center, right in the middle, you have one of the things we do a lot in infants, that is, once they write a full word, sorry, they have to identify the number of sounds in the word. So in the case of tiger, this girl is drawing a dot. Okay, she draws a dot below each letter, and then she sees a digraph. In the case of for example, she writes she writes or draws a dot and then a slash. That means that those two letters go together. They are the graph, so they have to go together, but it's only a sound unit. And again, this is very important for them visually to realize that there are cases in which two letters go together and they cannot be separated, and they form one single sound unit. Okay, so this is very practical also when writing. And little by little, they progress into, this is, for example, these kids here are all year one, the beginning of year one, to use picture dictionaries. So from picture dictionaries, they are able to start writing full sentences independently. So these two girls, for example, this is an example in February 2011, all right? That is at the beginning of the second term. They are writing completely independently on the notebooks. They are writing handwriting with some hints or props that we used in class previously, and later on they sit down and do the writing alone on their own. So to finish with, remember that in phonics it's very important to follow the steps, to progress adequately throughout all the stages or all the different phases, and not try to run a lot. Not hurry the children to, I need to finish this to go on to the next. The good thing about phonics is that you can go at the pace your class demands, all right? It's not necessary to hurry up. You can go slower if they need to consolidate, if they need to revise things, etc. But what is important is that you never skip one phase, so you jump ahead, or you can always go back, because this is a way of resisting, but don't jump ahead or don't skip phases, because otherwise there would be some problems later on when building up the rest of more difficult words and sentences, and etc. So it's very important to follow all the steps and to follow all the phases we should do in phonics, all right? Because for phonics being successful, it depends a lot on observing all the different phases there are, and all the way of presenting the sounds, tricky words, etc., etc. Right? Okay, so that's all I had to tell you today. So you saw that from the very first webinar where we started with at, etc., up to this webinar, how the students progressed from learning and identifying the independent letter sounds into being able to read and write independently. And you could see there are examples of children up to year one. So you see that at the end, the result is that they can read comprehensively, understanding what they read, and they can write independently very well and with a nice handwriting, as you could see.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Angela. It has been really a pleasure having you here these 3 sessions. I don't know if anyone has any question or any comment, whatever you want to either switch on the microphone or write it.
I have a doubt.
Okay, go ahead.
Angela,
yeah.
Maybe this year I'm going to teach in infant education. After some years ago, I taught in infant education, and I don't know when is a good time to introduce the tricky words. Do you think
exactly.
3 years old is?
Yeah, listen, in 3 years old, we introduce 3 main tricky words, which is I,
She, and he.
the, she, he, and sometimes even my. all right, because those are the most useful one at those ages, all right. This is my cup, this is my pencil, this is, and we are in a very selfish moment of their lives, right?
Yeah.
She, he, because they are around. Sometimes I don't introduce go as a tricky word, because we use go on a daily basis. Can I go to the toilet? Yeah, you can go to the toilet. So this is something that we do later on. But in infants 3, my recommendation should be I, the, me, he, and she, especially those. If you have a very strong class, you can try to introduce some others. Because as someone says there, Natalia Martinez, in some methods, tricky words are introduced at the same time as letter sounds. Is that okay? Yeah. The recommendation is to wait until you have taught at least the first group of letter sounds. So, for example, once you have introduced sat a pen, you can introduce I. Why? Because with combination of satipin letters and I, you can start, for example, I sit on a, I sit on a, let me see, on a, well, on a pin. This could be, grammatically is correct. I could sit on a pin, or I sit on a pin, or by combining all those words, if they know I and they can start reading full sentences. So this is why the normal thing to do would be introduce the first group of letter sounds independently, the independent letter sounds, and then you can start with the tricky words. And yes, we do it in parallel most of the times. Okay. But in infant 3, my recommendation would be at least those 5. And again, no better than you would know your students. So if you see that your group is a strong one, you can go ahead and introduce some more. The important thing about tricky words is that they understand that there's some change in there.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Maika.
Any other question? Someone want to say something? Lucy, are you talking because your microphone is off? Maybe you need to switch on your. Okay, perfect.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to say thank you to you, Angela. Really, thank you so much. I've said before last time I told you I'm Dutch. I've been teaching at a school in Spain.
Yeah.
I've been teaching English for more than 20 years, almost 25 years, and I could share so many things with you. I've really learned a lot, and I wanted to say thank you to you. Really, our school is completely different because the kids have 6 hours of English in infants. So
in my school we have 8 per week. Yeah, because my school is one of the British Council MEG ones. So, but even if you have one session per week, everything you do with phonics is going to be really beneficial for them.
We do. What I'm going to change, because I was wrong. They've got 7 hours. I teach 1 hour in each group in infants, and I'm the one who's in charge of phonics. So I do that once a week, and then I continue teaching them in primary school. So. No, but I've really learned a lot. But the basic difference between the other 2 teachers are native speakers, and I'm not. There's so many ways of teaching a language. Like you, I've learned lots of languages too, and I think our school goes, I wouldn't say a step further ahead, because then it looks as if that's better, and it's not. There are many different ways of teaching. But we teach them to express themselves orally first, and then based on that, they go a step further ahead.
Yeah, what we do this in parallel, because we do a lot of oral expression from the very beginning too. So we do oral expression and phonics because, as I said before, phonics is just a little part of the full session. So
Exactly.
we teach phonics for 5 minutes, and then the rest of the time we do the normal things we do in English, which obviously with early years, most of the time is listening and speaking, and they have to learn how to express themselves. We use a lot of storytelling and nursery rhymes, so a lot of oral things. And one of the important things when they are so young and when they reach infants 5, for example, is that they have a really, really high level of comprehension, very high level of comprehension, and we are able to get from them some sentences, for example. So, you know, stronger students are able to utter full sentences in English, not only classroom language, like can I go to the toilet or can I borrow, that is on a daily basis. But I mean, they can express themselves, and that is something we do on a daily basis too, in parallel with phonics. So phonics is a little part of everything we do apart from that.
No,
I think that everything should be together, definitely.
No, of course.
The thing we delay a little bit probably is the writing. We don't demand a lot of writing from them.
No, you do.
They are in primary.
You do a lot more than we do as far as reading and writing in infants. But I suppose that we're also influenced. I'm Dutch. The other two are, one is American, the other one is English. They're influenced by the system we received ourselves.
Maybe, yeah.
So, yeah. At least I've learned from you that next year I will start phonics in the 3-year-olds, because we start in the 4-year-olds.
Yeah. That makes that, believe it or not, that makes a difference because at least even if during the first year you only play with the sounds and the children train their ear, that is a long way you have already walked through. And when they get into infants 4, all that has already been done. So you can progress onto more tricky words and start introducing writing, because we introduce writing properly in infants 4. And in infants 5, most of the kids finish writing full sentence level, all right? Some of them don't, because we have different levels as usual, but the majority of children are able to write independently a full sentence, and they are able to read independently some decodable books. But it makes a difference. Beginning at the age of 3 makes a difference, because I know many people who start at the age of 5, and you see the delay in there. So even if in year 3 you only experiment with the sounds and play with them, you'll see the difference, definitely.
And then from primary school onwards, I also use global reading. I used it already by myself, but I didn't even know it existed. Yeah. But that really, I think it's functionable. It's really effective.
Yeah, very, very much.
So thank you so much once again. It's been great.
Thanks to you for your ideas and contributions.
Anyone else wants to share their experience, ask something, whatever? Maybe another person, another teacher working with phonics? I don't know. Okay, so if we don't have any other question, just to repeat, Angela, thank you so much. We have learned so many things from the practical side, you know, and I think this is the real.
That was the aim.
Yeah, completely.
Because the theory, you can find them wherever in books or in.
Yeah. But this is something we're not gonna get in books. Okay, so thank you so much, and hope we can count with you in our next seminars in September, maybe. I know you.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, perfect. So we will have more Angela in September.
You're going to be fed up of me.
No, I'm sure we won't. And okay, so see you next week if you are interested in our next webinar, okay? And thank you all for being here. Bye.
Thank you very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the week and the weekend. See you soon. Next week I'll be as an attendee. Bye.
Bye.